Hey, podcast friends. This is Dr. Steve Hewlett with the podcast, Simple Healthy Choices for Weight Loss, where every week we help people who have realized that as their health has been declining over the years, the number of medications they are being prescribed is increasing. We want to help you reverse this health path so you can live the vibrant, pain-free, and hopefully medication-free life you deserve to live. If you'd like even more information on this topic, you can go to Amazon or Audible and pick up my book, Your Plate is Your Fate. And if you think my book helps you on your new health path, please tell your friends and leave a review where you purchased it. Hey, welcome back, podcast friends, to another episode on nutrition. And in this one, in the last episode, I talked to you all about proteins and how important proteins are in the body. This episode is all going to be on just fat. And the main thing I want you to realize is all the propaganda that the drug companies and food companies are putting out there saying that fat and cholesterol, eating that, is what's causing heart attacks and is what's causing obesity and type 2 diabetes. That's all a lie. It's all a lie, and I'll talk about that later. But it is not fat and cholesterol. Fat and cholesterol are extremely vital to our health, to our bodies. Without fat and cholesterol, we would not survive. There's no way. So just like I said with proteins, how anytime you eat your macronutrients, which is proteins, fat, and carbohydrates, your intestines break those down to the basic building blocks. So just like with protein, all its basic building block, when you tear it down to the basic building block, it's amino acids. When you have fat and you break down fat to its basic building block, it's fatty acids. And then when you have carbohydrates, which means anything that's made from a plant, when you break anything made from a plant down to its basic building block, it's glucose. All carbohydrates are made out of glucose. So we'll talk about that later. But anyway, so the basic building blocks of fat are fatty acids. And fatty acids and cholesterol are so important to our body. There are different things. We use fat and cholesterol for all our energy storage. That's why we have fat cells all over our subcutaneous tissues, right underneath our skin. We have fat storage cells because our body knows how important it is to have fat to use for energy. The key is you want to be able to store fat and then burn it for energy, and then store fat and then burn it for energy. But as we've talked about in many of our podcasts, when you eat nothing but carbohydrates, like most people do, and you keep your insulin levels high, all you can do is force your body to store fat. You can never use it for energy, so you have to use the carbohydrates. And that's what we're trying to get through to people right now, especially with podcasts like this and books like what I've written. We need to get through to people that they need to quit eating all these carbohydrates, and that's what's causing all our diseases. And again, we'll talk about that later. So anyway, so you need fat for your energy, and it's a very clean energy source. Every single cell in our body can use fat for an energy source, and it's just better. But the other thing that fat does is also it's used for insulation all around our body. It's used for insulation all around in our subcutaneous tissues, but it's also used for insulation all around our nerves. You have this white called a myelin sheath that gets wrapped around your nerves, and that's what helps nerves repair. Well, this myelin sheath is made out of fat. So you need fat in order to keep your nervous system be able to be repaired on the types of nerves that can be repaired. Also, every single cell in your body, every single cell is made up of fat and cholesterol. Every single cell in your body, the cell membrane is made up of fat. So anytime you have any kind of damage, which we're replacing cells constantly in our bodies, our intestinal skin is always breaking down, our white blood cells, our red blood cells, that's our skin on just everywhere, our hair, everything. We're constantly replacing more cells all the time. And all the damage that we do to our blood vessels all the time, which that's what we'll talk about in just a little bit. But also you need cortisol for things like hormones. So if you didn't have cortisol, you wouldn't have testosterone, you wouldn't have vitamin D, you wouldn't have estrogen, you wouldn't have cortisol, which is your stress hormone, you wouldn't have progesterone. These are all hormones that are made out of cholesterol. Cholesterol is so important. The other thing is there are vitamins. Remember, we talked about the vitamins. And there are some vitamins that are water soluble, and there are some vitamins that are fat soluble. And the fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. You have to have fat in your nutrition so you can get these vitamins absorbed across and into the bloodstream. If you don't have fat in your intestines, you're not going to be able to absorb these fat soluble vitamins. So that's why a lot of people are really deficient in things like vitamin D, vitamin K, actually all of them. Now, a lot of people are deficient. And again, the vitamin D is also because people don't go out in the sun the way they're supposed to. And when they do get out in the sun, they lather their body in all these chemical sunscreens that are running as killing, more chemicals in our bodies and decreasing all the great things that we get from the sun. But that's a whole nother topic. The other thing that fat does is it cushions all of our organs. Okay, so we have a fatty layer inside, a little apron over our intestines that cushions our body. So we need fat for all that. It also helps regulate our hunger and our satiety, which means feeling full. We use fat, and fat when we're using fat for our energy source, we're not hungry. And when our fat cells get full, it can stimulate a hormone called leptin, which makes it where you're not hungry. So fat is very, very important in whether we're hungry or whether we're not hungry also. And when you eat fat, it keeps you full for long periods of time. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. It also maintains this energy balance because what you're supposed to be able to do, we have two different forms of energy. We have carbohydrates and we have fat. Fat is we're supposed to use for our energy all the time, day in, day out. That's our main energy source. And our carbohydrates, we're only supposed to use that for our fight or flight energy. We need quick energy and we need it now. But if we don't have any of that, all the excess carbohydrates that you eat get turned into triglycerides and stored as fat because that's how important fat is to our bodies. So it maintains a good energy balance. It also regulates your glucose and your cholesterol levels. So you need fat in order to keep your glucose levels down. It also maintains insulin sensitivity. When you eat a good high quality animal fat, animal protein, it keeps your insulin levels low because it's carbohydrates that make your insulin levels go high. And insulin is what causes a lot of this damage all over our bodies. And we'll talk about that. But when you use fat as your energy source, it keeps your insulin levels low. And that's a good thing also. It generates heat. So when you get cold, your fat cells are going to generate heat. And we'll talk just a little bit, but I've already done a podcast in the past talking about brown fat and white fat. And brown fat just generates heat. That's why brown fat is so important. And you can turn white fat, which is the storage fat, you can turn white fat into brown fat when you keep your insulin levels low. When you keep your insulin levels high, you make brown fat go into white fat. And I'm just skimming through this. These are all podcasts that I've done in the past. I'm just talking about all the different things that fat does that's so good for the body. The other thing besides generating heat, it also contributes to our immunity. High LDLs actually have an antibiotic effect. It can actually help fight all the pathogens that get into our body. And it stimulates our immune system. So you want high LDLs. LDLs are good. They're not bad like drug companies, food companies are telling you. And I'll explain that in just a little bit. But high LDLs are good. And then also you need your essential fatty acids. Remember I said that there are essential, like with proteins, last week when we talked about proteins, there are 9 essential proteins. So there's 20 amino acids totally. And of those 20, 9 of them are essential, meaning your body does not make them. You have to get them from the food that you eat. That's what essential means. With fat, there are 2 fatty acids. There are 2 essential fatty acids also, which means your body doesn't make them. You have to get them from the food that you eat. That's omega-3 and omega-6. However, when you eat carbohydrates, there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. You can go from the time you're born all the way until you live to be 120 years old, never put a carbohydrate in your mouth, and you'll be perfectly healthy. No problems. If you can you can maintain yourself just on animal protein and animal meat. That'll give you all the nutrients that you need. And that's what we're talking about with all these. These aren't diets. This is giving your body the nutrients that it needs to survive. So with the omega-3 and omega-6s, the omega-3s, those are essential fatty acids that go into helping with they make your anti-inflammatory prostaglandins. So when you have inflammation in your body, you need anti-inflammatory prostaglandins to negate that, to bring the inflammation down. And then omega-6s, those are the opposite. Those are the inflammatory prostaglandins, which you need inflammation. If you get cut or something, you need your body to mount an immune response, an inflammatory response, so it can take care of and heal that wound. So anyway, like I said, there are so many things that fat does in our body. It is essential. It is vital. Cholesterol, every single cell in your body makes cholesterol. Every single cell, that's how important cholesterol is. And your brain uses up 20 to 25% of all the cholesterol that your body makes is used by the brain. That's how important cholesterol is. So when you look at all the things that fat does and cholesterol does, when you hear these drug companies, food companies telling you that fat and cholesterol are bad in your diet, it is a lie. It is vital. So anyway, so let's go on just like we did with the protein. We'll kind of break it down. First, what happens when you eat? Okay. When you eat food, when you eat a meal, and let's just say you have protein, fat, and carbohydrates in your meal. So you eat this meal. When you first eat that, and I talked about this last week too, the very first thing it does, it gets in your stomach, stretches your stomach out, and that causes you to feel full. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't eat anymore. I'm stuffed. But after about, 2-3 hours, all the stomach acid has worked on all that food and it's slowly secreting it into your intestines. And that's where your intestines really break it down to the basic building blocks of amino acids, fatty acids, and glucose. So that's what your intestines are doing. But what happens, and I talked about this last week also, there are hormones in your intestines, all through your intestines, from the upper part of your small intestine all the way down to the upper part of your colon. So past your lower small intestine, there are things called cholecystokinin and peptide YY. These are hormones that get secreted into the bloodstream and go up to your brain and tell your brain, I'm full, don't eat anymore. And this peptide YY and cholecystokinin get stimulated by amino acids, which is protein, and fatty acids, which is fat. So when you eat a meal of high protein, high fat, and that goes through your intestines, that keeps you feeling full for a long time. You can go days without eating when you have a good protein and fat meal. Carbohydrates don't stimulate that at all. So when you eat carbohydrates, it makes you feel very hungry. It gets turned into glucose, shut into the blood, and then I've talked about all this in the past also. So fat will keep you hungry for a longer period of time because fat stimulates cholecystokinin and peptide YY. So how does this fat get absorbed? How does it get into your blood from your bloodstream? Now remember, and this is very important because your fat cannot be put straight into the bloodstream because fat is fat and blood is water, and fat and water don't mix. So your body has a very great way of making like these great big, think of them as a great big battleship. This huge battleship, and these are made by your intestines. And this battleship, it puts down in the cargo of the ship, it has a bunch of cholesterol from what you just ate and a bunch of triglycerides from what you just ate. And that's all down in the hull of this huge battleship. Then it takes this battleship and it puts it into what's called your lymphatic system. But this is a system that runs right along the side of all your blood vessels, all your veins and your arteries. You have this lymphatic system, and that's where the fat gets put in that, and then that's how the fat gets into your blood. But it gets in there by these big battleships. This battleship is called a chylomicron. You don't need to know that. Just know that this huge battleship that gets all this fat out of the intestines, puts it straight into the blood, is a chylomicron. And now, that's one thing. And then as this battleship goes around and starts releasing all the triglycerides and all the cholesterol, and the triglyceride is just a fatty acid. A triglyceride, just real quick, if you picture a capital E and you have the vertical backbone, that's glycerol. And then each of the little horizontal side chains, the three little side chains on a capital E, those are each free fatty acids. And that's a triglyceride because there's three fatty acids. So it's called tri, and it's glyceride because there's the glycerol backbone. A triglyceride is the form of fat that your body uses to transport around your blood and also to get inside the cells so they can be broken into fatty acids. So your body can do all those things that we just talked about that our body does with fat, that our body needs fat for. Okay. So how this happens is as this big old ship, it starts releasing all this triglycerides and cholesterol to all over the body where it's needed. The ship gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it becomes what's called a chylomicron remnant. This chylomicron remnant goes back to the liver. The liver takes whatever triglycerides and cholesterol weren't used, and then it repackages it and it puts it into, and this is where when you get your lipid panel, you hear about your VLDLs, IDLs, LDLs, HDLs, and they call this cholesterol. That's not really cholesterol, and I'll talk about that. Or those are actual ships also, okay? But pretend like a VLDL is a small chylomicron. So instead of a battleship, a VLDL, and the L at the end of this stands for lipoprotein, okay? VLDL, IDL, LDL, HDL. The last L is lipoprotein. And that's what this means, because you have lipids, you have cholesterol and triglycerides. You have those down the hull of the ship. And then the ship itself is a protein. So with these two fats, cholesterol and triglycerides, together, fat is called lipids. So this is called a lipoprotein, because you have fats and you have protein. Chylomicron is a huge lipoprotein, but just called chylomicron. In your liver, it makes the VLDL, which stands for very low density lipoprotein. So that means there's a lot of triglycerides. There's cholesterol and a lot of triglycerides. And let's say it's like a yacht. So we'll say like your VLDLs are like the size of a yacht. Okay, not a battleship like the chylomicrons. So you have the VLDL, it's a yacht. You have the IDL, which is intermediate density lipoprotein. That's like a cabin cruiser. And then you have the LDLs, and this is like a little ski boat. Okay, and this is normal. So this is exactly like chylomicron. These are little ships that have cholesterol and triglycerides down in the hull. And then they have the protein wrapped around it so they can transport around to the body, release the fats and cholesterol to all the places that the body uses, and whatever it doesn't use, then it's going to take it to get stored. Okay. So a VLDL, the reason it's called very low density is because there's a lot of triglycerides. So a low density means it floats. So this ship, this yacht, it floats on top of the water with no problem, because it is very low density. As this yacht travels around the blood, it's releasing its cholesterol and its triglycerides, and it starts shrinking. So it becomes an intermediate density lipoprotein. This is like the cabin cruiser. And then it gives up more of these triglycerides and this cholesterol, and it gets even smaller. And that's called a low density lipoprotein, or the LDL. And these are what you get checked when you get your cholesterol checked. So that's an LDL. That's like a little ski boat. This is all perfectly normal. That's what these do, is they go around and they drop off triglycerides and cholesterol to all the places that are needed. Very, very, very important. The problem comes when you make so many triglycerides that you take these ships and you have a little bit of cholesterol, and then you're just cramming as much triglycerides in there as possible. So you have all these triglycerides as it's going around your body, and it starts releasing it, and it releases all these triglycerides. It gets so small that it gets even smaller than the LDL. It becomes what's called a small, dense LDL. And picture these like bass boats. These are the little bass boats. And this is the problem. When you have these big ships that keep losing their fat and get smaller and smaller and smaller, it stops at the LDLs. The LDLs goes back to the liver. It gets more triglycerides, more cholesterol, and it becomes a VLDL again. And then it goes back out. But when you have so many triglycerides that as this shrinks down to the size, it goes from a ski boat down to a bass boat, the small dense LDLs, that's what causes all the damage in our blood vessels. It causes cardiovascular disease. That is what causes heart attacks. And I'll talk about it more in just a little bit. But it's these small dense LDLs. And the reason that they had so much triglycerides to begin with before it started getting rid of it, and they shrunk to practically nothing, is because of eating carbohydrates. Because when you eat carbohydrates, remember we talked about all these things that fat does to the body. Carbohydrates, all they can do is the glucose and carbohydrates, all it can be used is energy. So you eat it, you get immediate energy, whatever you're doing as soon as you get done eating. Then it looks at your little bitty glycogen stores, which is your glucose stores. And I've talked about this in the past. So, if you don't understand, you can listen to some of the other podcasts. But you have little bitty glucose stores in 10% of your liver. That's all you have for your whole energy source. And then 1% of each skeletal muscle, but that can only be used for that skeletal muscle. So you have a little 10%. And all the rest. So once you eat carbohydrates, it'll use whatever energy you're eating right then, you need right then. Then it goes and it replenishes your glycogen stores. And then all the rest of that gets turned into triglycerides in your liver. So now you have all these triglycerides in your liver because of all the carbohydrates that you're eating. So you have to pack them into these ships, these great big yachts, cabin cruisers, and ski boats. You have to pack it in there so they can carry it around. So if you don't want to get the small, dense LDLs, then you need to quit eating the carbohydrates. So then there's another carbohydrate or another cholesterol that you hear of is the HDLs. These are the high density lipoproteins, and this is what they call your good cholesterol. Now, the VLDLs, IDLs, and LDLs, those are made in the liver. HDLs are actually made in the intestines. They're made in your intestinal linings, which is another reason why having good gut health is extremely important. And HDLs, the reason they're called good cholesterol is because these are like the triglyceride and cholesterol regulators. They can actually take cholesterol and triglycerides and change them between the VLDLs, the IDLs, and the LDLs, your yacht, your cabin cruiser, and your ski boats. The HDLs can come in here and they can transport triglyceride and cholesterol back and forth between them also. They also go around your intestines and they can pick up whatever cholesterol and fat is on your blood vessels. It'll pick up the fat and the cholesterol that's on your blood vessels. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit, why there's fat and cholesterol on your blood vessels. But I'm not going to go deep into this. I actually did a whole podcast number 7, called Things to Look For When Having a Lipid Panel Done. That was episode 7, and it explains all about what I just now talked about. And also with the lymphatic system, I forgot to tell you, the lymphatic system, that's what your chylomicrons, the fat that's in your intestines that you just ate, that's how that gets into your blood, is through the lymphatic system. I talked all about the lymphatic system on podcast 29 on why is moving your body important for infection, nutrition, and swelling. And that's episode 29. That's all explains all about what the lymphatic system is. But HDLs, that's why those are good. You want to raise these HDLs, and I'll tell you why in just a little bit. Because when you look at, I'll tell you now, when you look at your cholesterol panel, you don't care what the LDLs are. And I actually did this podcast also. I don't mean to sit here and throw those all out, but I did. Podcast number 43 is called, Are High LDLs Bad for You? The answer is no, high LDLs are not bad for you. What you look at when you do a lipid panel is you want your total cholesterol and divide that by your HDLs. So total cholesterol divided by your HDLs, and you want that to be less than 5. And really, you'd like to have that less than 3.5. The other thing you look at is your triglycerides divided by your HDLs. And you want that to be less than 2. And really, you want that closer to 1-to-1. So your HDL level and your triglycerides should be close to about the same. That's what you really want to have. The way you raise, so as you see, the higher your HDLs are, the lower those numbers are going to be. And the way you raise your HDLs is by lifting heavy things. Okay, lift heavy things, resistance training. When you lift heavy things, that increases your HDLs. Also, when you eat a low carbohydrate, like a low carb diet or a ketogenic diet or definitely a carnivore diet, when you eat low carbs, that also causes your HDLs to go up. And this is a good thing. So that's the main thing you want to do. Stay away from carbs and lift heavy things, and that'll get your HDLs up. So that's how fat gets absorbed in your body, keeps you feeling full, gets absorbed in the blood, moves around, gives the fat to all the places that it's needed. The other thing I want to make sure that you realize is fat is an extremely good energy source. With carbohydrates, you only get 4 calories per gram of carbohydrates. With fat, you get 9 calories, over twice the amount of energy in the same, just a gram of fat. And we have storage all over our bodies. This is the way it works. But you can't use glucose and fat at the same time for your energy. It's either one or the other. And what determines that is your insulin levels. So when your insulin levels are high, it forces you to store fat. It takes all those triglycerides and stores it as fat. When your insulin levels drop down low, like when you sleep at night, it causes you to burn your fat from the outside. So if you can, the longer you keep your insulin levels low, the more you're burning your own fat. We call that dining in, because you don't have to eat at all. You don't have to. You've got energy coming all the time because it's coming from your fat cells. And that's what you want, to go from, burning the fat, storing the fat, burning the fat, storing the fat. But as soon as you get your insulin levels high again, which your insulin levels go high because of glucose in your blood, and your glucose in your blood goes high because you're eating carbohydrates, because all carbohydrates are made out of glucose. So energy usage is very, very important. You really want to keep your insulin levels low so you can burn fat for your energy source. And that's important because fat, when you eat fat, that's why fat doesn't raise your insulin levels at all. And you'll see in just a little bit why that's so important. But fat doesn't raise your insulin levels at all. Protein raises it just a little bit, not very much. And carbohydrates really raise it. And especially when you talk about man-made carbohydrates. So that's what fat does. That's where it's stored in your body. The next thing, there are good fats and there are bad fats. There are actually extremely toxic fats and extremely healthy fats. The toxic fats, the fats that you do not want to put in your body, are vegetable and seed oils. These things are put in every single man-made box, bottle, bag, can, crud, and all your fast food restaurants. They're all made out. If you get anything fried out there, it's going to be in a vegetable seed oil. And these things, I talked all about this in episode 21, where it said, are vegetables and seed oils bad for you? The answer is yes, they are horrible for you. And I'll explain why. And there's a whole thing, if you really want an eye opener, look at where Crisco came from. Crisco was the first time we actually ate vegetable oil, and Procter & Gamble made everybody believe that this is just as good as animal fat to eat this Crisco. The only reason they did that was because he needed to get rid of all these cotton seeds. That's what Crisco stands for, is cottonseed oil. Crisco, he needed to get rid of all these cotton seeds and thought, hey, why don't we just give it to the people and let them eat it? But anyway, I've talked about this in Pat podcast, so I won't talk about that too. Healthy fats are like plants. As far as a plant, the only healthy fat that you're going to get is avocado oil, coconut oil, and extra virgin olive oil. Those are the only three healthy plant fats that you want. All the other ones you want to stay far away from because they are so chemical laden. There's so many chemicals for the petrochemical solvents and the deodorizers and the bleaching agents and just all the different chemicals they put in these vegetable seed oils are absolutely inflammatory to your body. They call inflammation all over the body. So the only ones that don't have to go through that major process are avocado oil, coconut oil, and extra virgin olive oil. So those are the only plant ones. Your animal fats are extremely healthy. Tallow, that's the fat from beef. Lard, which is the fat from pork, like pigs. And then things like eggs and butter. Those are your good animal fats. And our body needs those. Those are extremely important to our bodies. As we've already seen, all the things that you do with fat, not just for energy, but for everything else. And that's why this thing of calories in versus calories out, saying if you want to lose weight, you just have to take in less calories than you burn off. That is a lie, again, made up by the drug companies and food companies to say it's your fault that they've gotten you addicted to carbohydrates that are causing disease states all over the place. So when you talk about carbohydrates, when you talk about glucose, it is only energy because that's all it can be used for. But when you talk about fat's used for all these things. Like we said, every single cell in your membrane, every single cell in your body, all your hormone, a lot of your hormones, your fat soluble vitamins, energy, heat, all the things we talked about, the fat goes into. So it is not a calorie per calorie. So do high LDLs cause heart attacks? No, they do not. What causes heart attacks? Okay, now there's a few different things, but the main thing with this that we're talking about is four things. If you have high insulin and at the same time, because insulin, just having high insulin levels, that damages your blood vessels just all by itself. Then if you have high glucose also damages these blood vessels all by themselves. Okay, so having a high glucose is not good for your blood vessels. Inflammation damages your blood vessels. Okay, inflammation, we're constantly putting all these chemicals. If you eat man-made ultra-processed food and you go out to eat all the time, you're constantly bombarding yourself with these inflammatory chemicals. Then if you eat sugar has fructose in it. And fructose also is very damaging to your body. Okay, it causes a lot of inflammation and also gets turned straight into triglycerides. But because of this, then the other key is those small, dense LDLs that we were talking about. Remember, these were the bass boats. These are the little bitty boats, and they got there because of all the carbohydrates that you eat that get turned into triglycerides. So that your liver trying to cram all these triglycerides in this boat. As it goes around your bloodstream and starts getting away the triglycerides and cholesterol, it shrinks down to these little bitty bass boats. Your body doesn't like to take these bass boats back up. The liver doesn't like to take these small, dense LDLs back up. So they stay in the circulation longer. The more they're in your circulation and they have all these inflammatory markers that you get from eating all this vegetable and seed oils and fructose, the inflammation attaches to those LDLs. So high insulin is caused by high glucose. High glucose is caused by carbohydrate intake. Inflammation caused by fructose intake, which is in sugar, and these vegetable and seed oils. And all that forms these small, dense LDLs can bury into your blood vessels. And that's where you get all the damage to your blood vessels. Now, when you get damage to your blood vessels, your body has to heal that. So the way it heals it is it needs to get the triglycerides and the cholesterol over to that site so we can start increasing the cell production. Okay, so it's needed. So as soon as you have cell damage, this yacht, cabin cruiser, and ski boats, they go to the site. So obviously, when you have damage to your blood vessels, so much damage is causing cardiovascular disease, and you have all these boats going to try to fix it. If all you look at is, oh, look, your LDLs are high and you have cardiovascular disease, then obviously LDLs must cause cardiovascular disease. That is as stupid as saying that ambulances must be the cause of all major car wrecks. Because every single major car wreck that I've ever seen, there's always an ambulance right there at the same time. That's exactly what they're saying. LDLs are high when you have blood vessel damage, which causes cardiovascular disease. Therefore, LDLs must cause it. That is a lie. I just told you what causes it. It's the high insulin, high glucose, inflammation, and these small, dense LDLs. And all of these are caused by high carbohydrate intake. So why are we told that eating fat makes us fat? Well, back in episode 25 of this podcast, I did talk about the history of processed food, and it talks all about this. So all I'm going to say, this started back when Eisenhower had a heart attack in 1955, and everything changed after that because nobody used to have heart attacks. And they tried figuring out why. Ansel Keys was a Minnesota epidemiologist, and I won't go into this, but basically there's this one man that told everybody that eating fat is what makes you fat. He did no studies. This is just a thought he had. He looked at 21 different countries. I only found 7 of them that actually ate a lot of fat and they were obese. So he threw all the other countries out of his 21 country study and called it a 7 country study. Anyway, I talked about that in the history of processed food. So at first, that's when our dietary guidelines were written. And so everybody thought, oh, we're supposed to decrease our fat. They thought that was true. So they had to took fat out. We went everything no fat, low fat. And as soon as they took all the fat out, all our disease states started skyrocketing. Our obesity rate skyrocketed. Our type 2 diabetes rate skyrocketed. Our hypertension skyrocketed. Everything. Heart attack skyrocketed, Alzheimer's disease, cancers, skin conditions, everything skyrocketed after we started telling everybody, or they started telling everybody that eating fat's what made you fat. And that is wrong. That's a lie. Eating carbohydrates is what makes you fat. However, now the food companies, remember, the things that keep you feeling full is protein, animal protein, and animal fat. Okay. But they have to take all the animal protein and fat out of all their stuff. These food companies with the box, bottle, bag, cans, all the products that are down the middle aisles of the grocery stores, they have to take that stuff out because it can't stay on the shelf very long. It'll rot. It'll putrefy. Same thing with fiber. They have to take all the fiber out because fiber can't be frozen. So they can't transport these things back and forth across countries and across the world. So since they take the animal protein and the animal fat and the fiber out, they tell everybody that this is bad. You should not be eating animal fat. You should be not eating animal protein. The reason why they tell you that is because they want you eating their crud instead. That's the only reason that they do that. And that's why they go to great lengths. Not only do they go to great lengths, and I've already talked about how they actually, the 5 A's of making someone addicted to their food, besides how you make people addicted to your food, now they're going through and they're saying, not only are you addicted to our food, but we want you to tell you the other food is bad. Because when you eat nothing but animal protein and animal fat, you'll be full, you'll give your body all the nutrients it needs, and you will not be eating their food. And they don't want that because that's their bottom line. That's how they make money. The other thing is the drug companies. Why would drug companies tell you this? Well, one reason might be that they tell you that high LDLs are bad, which is a lie. That's not true. You don't even look at LDLs. You don't even need it on your lipid panel. The reason why they tell you that is because they made around $172 billion by 2022 selling statin drugs. So if they can sell you a drug that tells you that cholesterol is high, LDLs are bad, then they're going to make a fortune. And they do make a fortune on selling these. Even though, and I've already talked about this, if you go to episode 68, what are the most common adverse effects with statins? And I explained to you exactly how statins work, how they're extremely toxic to every single cell in your body. There's nothing good about them. And the way they remove the LDLs out of your blood is actually killing your cells because your cells are trying to survive. So there's no reason for these whatsoever, but yet the drug companies are making billions of dollars. And I also talked about how the excess of carbohydrates in episode 8, how excessive carbohydrate intake causes organ failure. And then also episode 12, how carbohydrates cause high blood pressure. So I want you to realize fat is good for our body. Cholesterol is good, vital. We have to have it to live. Carbohydrates, not only do we not need it, but when we eat carbohydrates, the amount that we do right now and the kind that we do, these ultra-processed carbohydrates, because all man-made food is made out of ultra-processed carbohydrates, sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and vegetable and seed oils. It's in everything, including your infant formulas. They put this in everything. So I want you to realize fat is not the evil villain that the drug companies and food companies are telling you. Fat is good. Fat is vital. We use fat for everything in our bodies. So do not be afraid of that. Do not be afraid of high LDL levels. There are extremely healthy people that have very high LDL levels, unless you're talking about LDLs over 300 or 400. But what you really want to watch are your triglyceride levels, your total cholesterol, which your triglycerides will increase that, and your HDLs. Those are the three that you care about. So to get your triglycerides down, quit eating carbohydrates. Or significantly, the only carbohydrates you should ever eat are real God-made fruits, real God-made vegetables, and that's it. None of this man-made food processed carbohydrates. But anyway, I've talked about that in all these other podcasts, so I'll end it there. I just want you to know fat is good. Fat is not bad. High LDLs are not bad. It's their triglycerides that you have to worry about. And if you decrease your carbs or eliminate them, you'll take care of all that. And you really will. You can get off all these medications, off the statins, off the diabetic meds, off the blood pressure meds, off the anxiety meds, off the Alzheimer's meds. There are so many things that so many medications you can get off of. And remember, I've been a doctor of pharmacy for over 33 years now. I know what I'm talking about. I know what medications do, and they all have extreme amounts of adverse effects that you just have to take another medication for and another medication for. So the best thing is when you have a disease, when you have a condition, it's not because you have a chemical imbalance that you need a drug for. It's because you're not giving your body the nutrients it needs. The nutrients your body needs is protein, fat, cholesterol, water, vitamins, and minerals. That's all it needs. And if you give it all that in adequate amounts, your body can get you through anything that you put it through. So I know this has gone long, but I just really, I hate the fact that these drug companies and food companies are still telling everybody, and now the government, American Diabetic Association, American Heart Association, they're all telling you, fat is bad, lower this, because they're all being taught by the drug companies. The drug companies do their own studies. They don't show anybody the result, or they don't show anybody the studies. They just come up with these results and then they tell the doctors, this is what we found, so go and continue to prescribe our medications. So anyway, this is not the doctor's fault. This is the fault of the drug companies who are actually going through and educating all our physicians. So I'm going to end it there, and I hope this made sense to you. But anyway, I'll go on with some more if this didn't make sense, or let me know. A lot of you have been letting me know through Facebook messages and stuff, letting me know that of what topics you want me to talk about. So just let me know that way also. So for now, I'm going to thank you again so much for listening. Have a fantastic week. And as always, make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button below and be sure to tell someone else who may want to change their health path as well. And don't forget, you can also purchase my book, Your Plate is Your Fate, on Amazon or Audible. And if you do, please leave a review.